Well, Math Moment Makers, we are really excited to have today's guest on for a Math Mentoring Moment episode. It's Joanne Ward. And hey, Joanne, it's awesome to reconnect with you. We have been in touch throughout many of the
Oh,
weeks.
it's been a while.
It's been a while, actually. And actually, before we hit record, Joanne, you were saying that you've been math geeking out with us since the Tap into Teen Mind days and the mrorr-is-a-geek days and all of those resources we were sharing way back when. So thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy world. We want to hear all about you. How are you doing? Where are you coming to us from? And just give us a little bit of context as to what your role is in math education.
So I'm Joanne, and I'm currently in Taipei, Taiwan, and I have been teaching. This year, it will be my 10th year, and then I spent 7 years in the high school, and that was back then when I'm reading everything on the Tap into Teens Mind, and then later on, Mr. Kyle, introduced me to Mr. John, and then I started to learn things about the lower level. And that's where I started to try to teach my own children. And then after 7 years in high school, I started to think that maybe going to middle school will be quite a transition and the fun. So then after 7 years, I have been moved to middle school. And then ever since I moved to middle school, I started to feel and explore everything, the resources in the Making Math moments, because that kind of material really helps children to learn and help children to get excited about math. So I am so excited that Mr. Kyle and Mr. John spend their time to help me.
Awesome stuff, Joanne. We're pretty excited to have you because, we said here, it's been a long time coming, and we're pumped to kind of dig into some of the pebbles, that are rattling around in your shoe to kind of pluck them away. Finally, as we meet after all this time. So before we get into all of that, do us a favor, Joanne. When we say math class, what pops into your mind from your experience as a student, or it's stuck with you all this time? Like what's your math moment when we say math class? Like what images come to mind in that memory that just sticks out to you? Tell us all about that, please.
So when I was young, my math moments is like the teacher is writing on the board, and the teacher did a beautiful job, organize everything, organize all the concept, organize all the formula, and then separate the questions into patterns. And then he or she will do this beautiful whiteboard writing, and we just copy everything down. And I just follow that. So that was the math moments that I was growing up.
So that's when you think math class, like that's what you think about. Like that's just stuck with you all this time, this like complete same image day in, day out of organized notes going up on the board, right?
Yes, exactly.
You know what? I think we all have a memory of that. I know I do as well. And actually, I think for many math teachers, including us, I think that was like we were striving to like do that even better. Like everybody wanted to have really well summarized notes, because why? Well, we wanted it to be more understandable for students. We wanted it to be easier for them to learn and to consume, right? To be consumers of the information. And I'm wondering, at what point did you, maybe start like when you reached out and sort of found some of the Tap into Teen Minds resources, which I was doing a lot of teaching in the high school classroom at the time. What motivated you to, I suppose, find that material? Was it by accident, or were you searching for something to try to do something differently in your own math classroom?
I think I seem to remember that I was looking for resources like on Twitter back in those days. And then I saw a video of you and John, like you were eating the chocolate, like kisses. And then there are two, that was like unbelievable. That was the first thing that I love it so much, like kisses and then the giant red chocolate. And then you guys put that. Yes. So that was the first thing. And after that, I started to tap into Tim's mind. And then Kyle, you make this spreadsheet that's so beautiful. Like it's task and task and task and task and task. So.
Right. Yeah, no, that task brings back the old memories, Kyle, of sitting in our kitchen and
John,
eating
you're
all that
actually
chocolate.
sitting like feet away from
Yeah,
where
it's
we
just
recorded that,
right,
like just
right.
across from where he's at right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think we felt very good after eating all of that chocolate and, you know, and in creating that task around volume, but also proportions. Like that was one of our kind of mix different strands into the same task. So Joanne, let's kind of dig in here. You know, you've been exploring, you know, resources, you've been dabbling with problem-based lessons. You know, you've been active for 7 years in the high school classroom, you're in a middle school, you've transitioned. What's on your mind? You know, like what can we help with? What would be a pebble in your shoe that that we all three of us can kind of dig in and see if we can, you know, pluck out of there and you know, so when you go into class tomorrow or the next day, you know, you're feeling a little bit more confident, you're feeling a little bit, you know, things are a little bit, you know, streamlined in the way that you want. Tell us about what's, you know, what's bugging you right now.
I feel insecure. Like in the past, after I read those tasks, I still teach directly because if I don't teach directly, I feel insecure. So I use the task like mix. I feel I read one of your blog posts, like at first you guys also use task like 1 day or 2 days, but in the end you transition to task every day. Like there's a blog post with slide listing how you guys have been transitioned. And I really admire that, but I feel insecure. Like I feel like if I don't directly tell them something, like what they don't know something, and then I started to run some tasks, and in the end, I feel the students are kind of like in the middle of something that I still don't know if they understand, and I just feel insecure. I don't know what to do.
So, you know, what it sounds like is that, you know, and maybe I'd like to dig a little deeper here as to, so I'm hearing that you're feeling insecure with maybe without having that sort of formalized direct instruction happening. And I also want to make sure that we're clear that if we go all the way back to some of our learning earlier in the journey, both John and I think feel that we almost strayed away from like feeling that we were not allowed to do any direct instruction. And in more recent times, I would say in the last 5 years specifically, we've really tried to, you know, be verbal, be explicit about when direct instruction should be happening and that it should happen. So it's not a bad thing that direct instruction's being used. So I want to make sure that that's clear. But I wonder for you, you know, do you feel that you know, is it that you're doing direct instruction every day and that you're trying to squeeze some tasks in almost like because you feel like you're supposed to? What does that look like and sound like for you right now? Because it sounds like you have some pressure, you feel like you should be doing something, but you are feeling like you can't stray away from this other thing over here. I want to make sure that we fully understand what it is that you're actually doing, because maybe it's all in our minds, right? Sometimes it's like we think we should be doing something different, but maybe things aren't actually as, you know, as dramatic as they might seem inside our own heads.
So what I have been doing for a while, like ever since that I started to study your material, is that I will do direct instruction, make sure that they understand the basic concept, then I'll put them into task, like your 3 scaffolded task, like task 1, and then time like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and see how they're doing. But I give them the task after I taught them the concept. So that's what I have been doing for a long time, is that I taught them first with a couple of slides, like basically this is what it is, without going into teaching them what that's supposed to, what they are supposed to answer the question. But I still do it because that's what I have been learning growing up, and then give them the task. So at this moment, the task is more like a assessment or a more like a review.
Or an
But then I see,
application.
yeah. But I see John's class, like in your website, there is like every day 1 minute moment, every day 2 minute moment, and or Kyle's class. It seems like you go directly inside and the students just write on their table, right on the
Yes.
window.
Yeah, that's
It's
correct.
just full-blown graffiti everywhere.
It's just jumping right
Someone
in.
who's
And
listening is going like, what is happening in
where are
those
they
classrooms?
writing? Where are they writing? Yeah, Joanne, you know, like, don't get us wrong too. Like when you're watching, say, those 30 minutes, you know, those 30 days and 30-minute videos that I put out about what my class looked like in that time frame. Like I had already been teaching through, you know, problem-based lessons. I had, you know, we've been inspiring our classroom for years, you know, leading up to that point. So, but when I rewind and when I, you know, first grappled with problem-based lessons and you know what, we've talked about it here numerous times about kind of our entry point. Kyle and I, before we spiraled our lessons, we were dabbling with, you know, 3-act math paths from Dan Meyer and kind of experimenting that way. But we taught them the same way you did, you know, the way you just explained it, is that I also saw it as I'm going to do my lecture style first, and then I will use this on my problem solving day, or I will use this after, you know, we've done this, to see if they can apply their knowledge that I've just given them, you know, into this world. And I'm gonna rewind myself and my memory back to that moment, because it feels very secure. Like you said, it's like I preloaded all of the information that they're going to need, and then I'm going to sit back and wait and see if they can solve this problem with the information. And you know, and sometimes that went well, and sometimes that didn't. Sometimes it's like we ran out of time when we did it that way. And you're like, oh, how do I fit this full task in, or this full lesson plan in after I've done my lesson plan? Because that can be very, very, very tight. And it's like, or if you take an extra day to do it, you're like, oh, I ran out of time. So I'm curious about your students and what they're doing on that part. So fill me in. Like you've pre-taught a lesson, and then you introduce this task, you introduce this problem, and they start to work on it. Are they jumping in right away? What are they typically doing around that? And then what makes you feel like, hey, this isn't working?
Like you said, I always ran out of time. Like it's a typical day that I would just run out of time. And then
Right.
I will give them the task, like task number one, question number one, the full task, like question number one, and then they will jump in. But I never get that kind of discussion that I see it from you guys' classes. And I kind of feel that if I teach them first, I kind of set them up for the formula. So what I see them more like doing is just solving it instead of exploring it.
Right.
And my wonder, and this is something that kind of popped into my mind as you were describing the idea of, you know, using the direct instruction and then giving the task. And I think you described it exactly how I envisioned it would probably go in my mind, which is you're essentially assessing where students are after the fact, which is not a bad practice to have, right? Like that's not something that we want to completely remove, because at times we're going to want to do that as well. But if what we're looking for is introducing a concept, if what we're looking for is using a task to engage in true problem solving where students are really engaging, my wonder is, you know, if you're after the exploration, then we have to be cautious not to sort of do the exploring for them, right? Like we call it doing that pre-teaching, because if we do the pre-teaching, then students are kind of waiting for us to do most of the heavy lifting, right? They're waiting for us to do all the work. And I mean, I know how I was as a student, and I would never, like the teacher sometimes would say, work on this example and then we'll take it up. I was the type of student that I would just sit and wait. Like I did not think about it. I didn't even read the question. I would just sit and wait. And that was either my daydream time. Like we didn't have cell phones when I was in high school, but I vividly remember just sort of being like, well, this is my time to, maybe goof around with my friend. Or,
Exactly.
if it was a strict teacher, then it would just be like my time to just stare, and sit doing nothing. I'm not necessarily proud of that, but I think it's human nature that when we have these opportunities to sort of sit and wait and kind of conserve that, that thinking time or thinking energy, our natural response is going to be to kind of sit and wait. So if I'm wondering for you is like, I'm wondering, is that something that you're really seeking? Like, are you going, the reason I want to use these problem-based lessons is so students explore. And I guess my wonder for you would be, how often would you like to see that? Because maybe it's every day, maybe it's twice a week. Like, how often are you looking for that sort of engagement? And is it just in general that maybe you want to see your class, shifting in terms of the culture? We talk about the culture a lot. And oftentimes, like, we're essentially creating a culture in our room when we get into certain routines. So if the routine is always that I tell you how, and that students will then, show that they were listening or show that they understand what I just said, then that's what that culture is going to be, which probably means not a whole lot of discourse. Students aren't going to engage in too much math conversation. It probably means they're not going to like try to think outside of the box, because I mean, I want to impress the teacher, right? The teacher did it that way, so I'm going to do it that way. That's got to be the most efficient way. And at the end of the day, it might still lead to students, knowing the math procedurally, but it might restrict them from kind of building some of those problem-solving skills. So I said a lot there. I'm wondering, what are you hoping? Like, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see happening in your classroom on a regular basis, or a certain number of days a week? Wave the magic wand right now and sort of paint us a picture of what you'd like to see. What would you like to keep that you have already? And then what are the new things that you'd like to see happening as well?
I think you got the extremely valuable point, like the culture. Like I saw that in your website, and then at the moment when I saw it, I didn't quite get it, but now I get it. That's a culture that I want to see, because at this moment, what I have been doing, if I teach them first and use the task, then it's kind of the task is exactly the same like a word problem. It's just a more elaborate word problem, but then that's not what I want to see. I still feel at this moment, my routine is very structured, and the students, like you said, I believe they just space out from time to time.
Hmm.
Hmm. You know what? You said the word structure, and I think I have always taught in my classroom very, very structured, and I taught, when I taught lecture style to begin, I'm like, hey, here's the pre-teaching, here's everything you need to know about what we're talking about here today. Let me also, I'll show you a practice problem, but then I'll show you another one, and then I'll show you a tougher one that's a word problem. Like, that was very structured, but when I shifted to problem-based lessons, like the lessons you're just talking about, the lessons that you can find on our website, like, to me, those are also very structured, because but it's getting what Kyle is saying, is that one type of structure, the lecture style structure is saying, I'm going to convey all this knowledge, I'm doing all the thinking, and they're doing all the mimicking, as Peter would call it, Peter Littledahl would call it. We've talked with him on the podcast a number of times. And then, whereas when I teach the other way, when I don't pre-teach, when I start with a problem, I'm very structured because of the way I structure the wonder portion, the curiosity portion of that. It's very structured when we do and utilize the 5 practices, for orchestrating productive mathematical discussions, that those 5 different practices around the room with our vertical boards. That's a very structured, even though if an outside teacher walks in, that to them, it might seem very unstructured, but it is very structured in the way that we structured this experience for students to engage in thinking. And they are now engaged in thinking, and we are actively, as teachers, ensuring that thinking continues. And soon as we, as soon as we start to consolidate, or as soon as we start to end that lesson, parts of it were saying, well, when am I going to get my students to stop thinking? My goal is to never, get my students to stop thinking, so that structure still is there. So I think what you're wanting to decide at this point, is where do I want to place the structure? Do I want to keep my structured approach so that I feel more secure in what I'm doing every day? Because you can get your lesson out and the timing of that. Or, do you want to shift so that you take a chance and go, you know what, I'm going to try this other structured lesson, and it's very structured, but I also my goal is shifted though. My goal is to not just get my lesson out and say I taught it. My goal is to get my students thinking more. And they're thinking about these concepts. And at first, it's going to take extra time. It's going to be scary. It's going to, make you feel insecure. But I'll promise you one thing: the more you do it, the more secure you will feel. Because at the end of a really good experience, and you said today, so many kids were thinking more than they were thinking the other way. And if you feel good about it, you'll be like, I'm doing that again tomorrow. It's like, that's when you decide, when is it not, have I done enough of those lessons, or how many should I do, a week? Because that's a common question. How many of these problem-based lessons, or how many times should I get my students to think, is really what they're asking. And you're saying every day you want your students to think. How can I structure my lesson every single day so that they're thinking? Sometimes it involves this 3-act math style lesson where we're getting them to wonder and notice and build curiosities. But sometimes we're structuring it to keep them thinking in a different way, but still you're not doing all the pre-teaching up front. It's a matter of when that teaching happens. And that Tim's teaching for now has shifted for us almost every single day to near the end of the lesson. Sometimes it comes in the middle for a little bit, and then we go back to thinking, and then we come back at the end, and we kind of tie it with a bow when we close our lessons. And we make sure that thinking is consolidated at that point. But that teaching can happen then, and that's when it mostly happens in my class. So I don't know, I said a lot, John. How are you feeling about the structure of the lesson, and which structure I think you're aiming for?
I think what you said is very precious. Like, I took you guys' workshop back in those days, and then that's when you taught about the 5 principle of the orchestration, the discussion. And at that moment, like, I think I heard it, but now as you explain, I think I started to get it. Yes, I agree with you. Like, you guys' lesson are super structured, and your task is super structured. It's just I want to transform my class into your structure, but not the current structure, the current, yeah. I want to see that happening.
Yeah, and what I'm sensing, like, we're digging deeper here, and what I want to ask next is why, because I remember back when you did our online workshop, and you were a very, like, by the way, fantastic student, because you were very active. You did all of the lessons, and responded in the community areas, and lots of reflecting. So when you look at the roadmap that's created for you to essentially craft the experience that you're telling us on this particular call right now that you're after, what is holding you back from doing what we've articulated in the past and back in the workshop as the real flipped classroom? This idea of, like, what you're doing right now is like the exact opposite order of how we would say in that course that we want to try to avoid that pre-teaching. That was one of the big takeaways from one of the modules. And we guided through the process on how to do that. What is holding you back from, because it's almost like at the beginning of the call, it was almost like you were kind of like, felt like it was an either or, but in our workshop, we actually say it's not an either or, it's actually just flipping it and going,
yes,
do the task first. What's holding you back from trying that, and then always knowing that what's coming next is that part that what will feel more structured to you, even though, like you articulated, all of our problem-based lessons are very structured, but in a
yes,
different routine. is it just like, have you just not ripped the Band-Aid off to try it? Or have you tried it and it wasn't successful in the past? How come, we're talking to you many years later and you're like, I haven't done it yet? Because there's got to be something here and it hasn't come out yet.
I think it's my transition from high school to middle school, like back in high school, because those kids are very mature, especially if I teach 11th grade, 12th grade, and then I throw the task up front, then they can just do it like back in high school. But then now I transition to middle school. I seem to remember that I tried to toss the task one time, and then the whole class is chaotic. And then I just
So
don't
the
know how to.
real issue
you're
just
worried.
came to the
You're worried.
surface.
Well, I think when you say chaotic, but I think I caught something right before you said chaotic too, is I think you were worried that they won't be able to do anything. How do I give them a task and then they don't know how to do the math that I'm supposed to help them with? Is that where the worry is? And then it's like chaotic because it's like, oh my gosh, no one is attempting anything, because how are they supposed to do it if I don't tell them how to do it? Is that what it is?
Yeah, because in the past I was teaching 12th grade, 11th grade, and now I also have 5th grade. And I all of a sudden from this very big to this very small, and the very small will just ask me all the questions all the time. But you guys teach even younger students and you can do it. So I just don't know. I just feel like yeah.
You know what? I want to give you something today, and I hope that this is, something that will be a game changer for you, is that when you do something one time, and we have talked about this before on the podcast, we talk about it in the workshop, is one of the hardest parts of making this transition is the transition, that initial step. And here's the interesting part. It's almost like somehow, some way, we think, like humans, we're all the same. We all think very similarly in this way, that we think that we can make a massive change in how we're going to do something like teaching a math lesson that you've done for 10 years and you experienced yourself in the same format for your 12 years and beyond, into university. We did this in one particular way for our entire life. And then we think somehow that the first time that we try to change it up, that it's going to go well. And I'm hoping that what I'm telling you is gonna land with you, that you, as educators, by making these changes, it is not going to be easy. And we can extrapolate this to other parts of our life. Like, think about, like, if you want to change your diet and you go, I've always eaten, this way, and I want to cut out, sugar, or I want to cut out caffeine, or I want to cut out alcohol, or whatever it is that, it is that you're trying to cut out. Those
Choose
are
your heart.
massive shifts. And that is totally something that you really got to be able to go, you know what? When I take this on, if I truly want it, I have to be okay with giving myself the grace and the time and the reflection that you're going to need, that's going to be necessary for you to go, what didn't go well there and why? Because there's always a why, right? It's not a you, it's not a them. And then there is this massive barrier that they are used to learning it a certain way too. So that's going to take a lot of time too. So you're trying to learn, they're trying to figure out what the heck's my teacher trying to do here. And there's going to be a little bit of this, I say a little bit, it's going to be a lot, which might mean that you might have to make some small changes along the way in order to lead you to the big change, right? So breaking it down a little bit and going, I'm going to start by always starting with a task, and I'm going to give them at least X number of minutes to work on it. And I'm going to try my best to not interfere for that many minutes and only ask questions, not give answers, and slowly work your way down that path. But whatever it is that you choose, I think right now, it's like you said you waved a magic wand and you want your class to have more exploration, more math talk and discourse, and, get students thinking. And it's like, until you take that first step and you stick with those steps, because if you took the step, but then you went back and you kind of went backwards. So it's like it never happened. So it's like, you're going to have to take that first step and you're going to go, oh, this does not feel good. And then you're going to have to take the next step and you're going to be like, this still doesn't feel good. It's going to take a while for you to get to that place. And of course, you don't want to just do it blindly. You're going to have to be reflective, and you're going to have to really be thinking like and committed to this journey. Because what you don't want to do is to just take blind steps and just keep going. And then you find out, down the road that you're like, oh, I have no idea what's going on here. There's no structure anymore. And all of a sudden, nobody wins in that particular scenario. So what do you think when I tell you that, when I'm kind of pushing you a little bit here? We know you well, we've seen you learning in the past. And when we heard that you had this struggle, we really wanted to, I think, be a little bit more forceful with our push over the edge. Where's your head at now? How do you feel? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you sad? Are you happy? How are you feeling? And what do you think your big takeaway is and the next step that you're going to make?
I feel hopeful. Like, I'm so thankful for both of your time, and what you and John said is very precious to me. Like, there's this small thing, especially when you mention like getting rid of bad diet and bad habit, and that's exactly what it is. That's, I have to break through this thing, not just see it one day and then go back, and then I'll feel more secure and then keep wandering.
I love it. I love it. I think you're going to make some waves. I feel it. And actually, what we should do, Joanne, we should check back with you in a little bit. So it's like, we're going to say, hey, Joanne, you're going to go off. You're going to limit the pre-teaching. We're going to choose some appropriate tasks. We're going to look at some tasks that kind of slowly, turn the math dial up, as Dan Meyer would call it, right? So if you go back and look at some of our middle school tasks on our website, you'll notice that we don't jump right into the task, because that's when kids will be like, I don't know what to do. It's slowly introduce different layers until they're, knee deep into it already. So we know you're going to go do it, because you've got the background, you've got that course under your belt, you've got all the resources in your hands, and we're going to check back with you in like 6 months, and we're going to see, Joanne, how have you done in your classes by taking this leap, like Kyle's saying. So what do you say? You game for checking back in say 6 months?
Yeah, and I'll write it down every day, like how I feel. Like,
I love it. And here's one thing I want you to write down as well. So I love that you're going to do that. That's going to be so helpful. But I want you to, for sure, write down at least one thing that went well, even if overall you didn't like how the whole thing went. So I want you to find what was one positive, even though, because our brains are going to go to all the things that didn't go well, right? So you've got a lot of practice in how you've always been teaching. And I'm going to bet that the way you're doing that is probably really, really great. And that there's a lot of great things that are happening there. So we don't want to throw all of that out, right? You can still do some of this work, but we're just going to flip it around for now. And you're going to find that, you know what, maybe some of the stuff that I was summarizing so beautifully for my kids, maybe I didn't need to do that, but I'll never know, because I always did it first. And I didn't know what they could or couldn't do yet. And I didn't know what to focus more on. So really, with this goal, I think if you stick to it, you're going to find that at first it's going to be odd. It's going to be awkward. Some days are going to, your heart's going to race a little more, right? You might feel like anxious or nervous because you're like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. But over time, as you do this more and more, you're going to start to pick up on things that your students are doing that show you, that essentially turn the task into a diagnostic tool, instead of it being like more of a formative or even a summative tool in some cases, right? Where we teach a whole lesson and go, now show me what you can do. Now we're doing it the opposite way, where we go, what can you do? And what you can't do, that's what I'm going to focus my direct instruction time on, right? Because, okay, so now I want to make sure that we bridge the gap here, but we don't waste time on this area that everybody seems to be doing really, really well. So I love that you're up for the challenge. We're so excited for you. And hey, we want to thank you for being a long listener. First time caller, though, I think it would be, as they say. And we wish you all the best. And we can't wait to check in with you 6 months down the road.
Thank you so much.
All right, Joanne, thanks so much. Take care.